everybody. Lord Tremendous here. Got another tremendous tall tales for you. This is session 2, the Blacksmith and the Octagon. If this is your first time ever seeing one of these, you should go and watch session 1 first. It's on the same YouTube channel. You should be able to find it no problem. Otherwise, then there's some plot and some background that you might not understand. But yeah, let's get right into it, shall we? Let's meet the party that we had for session 2. Now, I do have a core group of players that plays, we try to play 2 or 3 times a month. But you know how real life works and stuff like that. Sometimes not everybody can make it. So this is the party that I had for session 2. Some of them you will recognize, some of them you will not. Here we have our level 2 Khorne Paladin, Zarktis Darklorn. He has leveled up since the last session. His kill count is at 18 because he's a Khorne Paladin. It's kind of what he does. He has no injuries as of yet, and one of his achievements is he killed Battlecat. And if you watch session 1 or listen to session 1, however you want to see it, you will fully understand what that all means and why that's an achievement. Next up, we have our level 2 Dark Elf Cleric, Abon Darksun. He is our sadistic Dark Elf Cleric. His kill count is 4. He hasn't gotten any injuries yet, and he hasn't done anything achievement worthy, although he has done some memorable things. And if you watch session 1, you will understand exactly what I'm talking about. But yes, he is in this session as well. Next up is our level 2 Savage Orc Barbarian, Boss Goldtusk. His kill count is also 4. He has no injuries as of yet because he's just too powerful. And his achievements are he killed Berserk in Session 1, which is quite an achievement actually. Go back and listen to Session 1 if you haven't already to figure out why that's such a big deal. A new addition to this session, or to this campaign, however you want to see it, is a level 1 Black Orc Fighter. His name is Thump Thump. His kill count is 0, his injuries are none, and his achievements are none because this is his first session. He hasn't had a chance to break anything yet, either on himself or on anyone else. But yes, he is another fighter addition to our group, and he is a good one. Think Hodor. And here's Thump Thump's background. Thump Thump was a known warrior from Goldtusk's old tribe. Vicious in combat, his strength and ferocity was matched only by his incredible stupidity. He was gifted his name after his first battle, when he single-handedly killed an ogre giant with one blow. The entire warband cheered as the victorious orc bounced around the giant's corpse, clapping his hands and squealing, "Thump Thump! Thump Thump!" When asked why he kept on repeating the words, he pointed at his club and said, "Thump!" and then to the dead giant, "Thump!" It was very logical from an orc, and from that day forward, that's how the clan referred to him. It was not uncommon to find Thump Thump staring at something shiny for hours with childlike glee in his eyes. After Boss Goldtusk disappeared, Thump Thump wandered away from his tribe, not due to curiosity or desire to find his former war boss, but because a butterfly flew past him and Thump Thump was determined to capture it. It didn't take long for Thump Thump to lose the butterfly. Only then did the great dense black orc realize he was hopelessly lost. Too stupid to worry, Thump Thump simply kept walking in the direction he'd pursue the butterfly. It seemed to be as good a direction as any, and the way he figured it, if he kept walking straight, he'd eventually find something to thump and eat. After months of travel and running into many good things to thump and eat, Thump Thump found himself at the gates of Prague. He was just about to attack the city gates by himself when he saw a group of warriors coming through the main gate. Seeing an orc amongst them that looked familiar, Thump Thump approached them to get a closer look. As Thump Thump got closer, he recognized Goldtusk and immediately charged. This was the customary greeting of his tribe, and seeing that Goldtusk was a boss, it was only civil. The fight lasted only a few minutes and left both orcs with fresh wounds and huge toothy grins. Goldtusk introduced Thump Thump to the party, and he was accepted into their mercenary group without hesitation.
The Almighty says this must be a fashionable fight. It's drawn the finest people.
Next up, we have another newcomer, a level 1 human empire artificer, or engineer, or tinkerer, however you want to see him. His name is Marwyn Falric, and he has 0 kills, 0 injuries, and no achievements because, well, it's his first session. He hasn't had a chance to prove himself yet. And here is Marwyn's background. Marwyn Falric is not a wise man. However, he is an extremely intelligent one. He would be known far and wide for his inventions, and would be a rich and powerful empire noble if only he wasn't so incredibly gullible. Marwyn's designs improved the misfire rate of volley guns by 25% and the accuracy of steam tanks by 30%. Unfortunately, his rival artificers were able to convince him rather easily to show them his designs, and in the end they ended up taking credit for his work. Marwyn was disappointed by this, but he was a trusting soul and refused to see the situation for what it was. After observing the celebration of the engineers heralded as geniuses by the Emperor for coming up with the new designs, Marwyn left his vantage point outside the banquet hall. He wasn't invited to the celebration after all. He decided that he would gather up his meager possessions and wander the world for a while. After all, everything he invented here had already been invented by other artificers, so he really was useless in the capital. Merwin ended up finding himself as part of a mercenaries' caravan after he ran across them on the road. Their main wagon had thrown a wheel, and the merchant was having considerable difficulty with the repairs. Using one of his most basic designs, Mern was able to not only repair the wheel, but steam power the wagon as well, which made the horses pulling it obsolete, and thus the wagon moved twice as fast. Thrilled with his work, the merchant gave Merwin a horse, food, equipment, and gold to join his crew on their way to Prague. Merwin liked the man, so he accepted his generous offer. Upon arriving in Prague, Merwin was put up in the King's Repose, one of the nicest inns in Prague. Not one to sit idle in a room, no matter how nice it was, Merwin decided to see what all the hullabaloo was in the main hall. When he got down there, he saw that there were some large men gambling near the fire, and decided to join them. Merwin quickly did the math and figured out how to win. Using that knowledge, he quickly won every coin of the men's money. Merwin was having a very good time and failed to notice how quiet the other men had become. With the game over, the men invited Merwin to join them outside. Merwin, now seeing these men as very good friends, took them up on their offer and followed them happily outside of the city. Once outside the city, the men surrounded Merwin and offered him a deal. He listened intently and noticed how well maintained the weapons were that his new friends now held. The men told Merwin he would give them all his winnings, as well as anything of value he had on him, and in return, they would give him his life. Merwin had to admit, he didn't understand what was happening, but he was ashamed of himself for apparently losing his life, and it was very kind of these men to try to return it for him for such a paltry sum. He knew his life was a very valuable asset, and so agreed to their terms without any hesitation. As he handed over all the gold and possessions he had on him, as well as the horse the merchant had given him, one of his new friends began rifling through his pack. The man pulled out a small apple-sized metal object that had a red pin sticking out of it. Before Merwin could stop the man, he pulled the pin and looked confused as black smoke began to wisp from the object. Not knowing what else to do, Merwin dove behind the horses and covered his head. The explosion was amazing. Coughing, Merwin stood and immediately felt guilty. All of his new friends were now dead, as well as all of their horses and much of the gear and equipment. To honor them, Merwin salvaged what he could and made his way back into Prague so he could find a blacksmith and hire them on in order to repair some of the items, so he'd always have a memento of the friends he lost this night. Okay, one real quick thing before we begin. This game was designed with adult themes in mind. It's going to have adult language, adult themes, adult situations, and general adult stuff that kids probably shouldn't hear, see, or watch. Basically what I'm saying is that there's bad language, gore, torture, and other really bad stuff described in great detail in these stories, okay? This is not a fairy tale. This is an adult-themed campaign, with adults playing it with probably some deep-seated issues. So seriously, if you're not supposed to be watching this, or if you would rather not have your kids watch this with you, go ahead and just turn it off. It ain't going anywhere. It's not like YouTube's going to delete it. But yeah, really, really, viewer discretion is advised. So please, just consider that before continuing. Avon secures the door to the room as he leaves it. After arriving back in Prague, Drake's leg took a turn for the worse. The party agreed that Drake needed rest and time off his leg so that it could fully heal. The poor dwarf had one too many during their celebration and tried to dance an old dwarven jig. His leg snapped like a twig under the strain, and only Avon's magic prevented the leg from becoming septic. The party bought Drake a month's stay in a fine room with all the food, water, and medicine he needed until his leg was healed. Drake had given Zarktis the mercenary contract before they left him in the room. This way, Zarktis could act as the leader until one was appointed. After taking care of Drake, Zarktis, Goldtusk, and the party's new addition, Thump Thump, decided to look for some more fun. Zarktis and Goldtusk were still very pleased with the success of their first job, and Thump Thump simply blindly followed. It did not take long for Goldtusk to sniff out Prague's underground fight club.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Goldtusk and Thump Thump were almost giddy to get into the fighting ring and kill something. They pushed their way through the throng of seedy people crowded around a well-built fighting ring. The arena was an octagon-shaped ring that was about 25 feet in diameter. It was set in a pit that was about 10 feet down, which made watching the battle taking place inside easy no matter how far back one was forced to stand. A very sturdy wooden barrier lined the arena. It was magically enchanted so that no one outside the arena could affect anything happening inside, and vice versa. Nothing worse for business than a gambling spectator getting killed by shrapnel. The last fight was just wrapping up as the allies arrived. Two hulking men were punching each other into a pulp. One of the men was able to land a solid blow to the other man's jaw and knocked him out cold. The crowd roared their approval as the triumphant man raised his arms in victory. A squat man entered the arena and took the victorious man by the wrist. "We have a winner, ladies and gentlemen," the squat man boomed. "Ajax the Mighty." As the announcer screamed the victorious man's name, the crowd exploded once again in cheers and jeers. People that had gambled wisely were given their winnings, while the losers were left to their drinks and grumbling. Goldtusk and Thump Thump moved to meet the announcer when they saw him head toward the exit of the arena. Thump Thump reached the man first, but it was Goldtusk that spoke. "Me fight next," Goldtusk declared. Thump Thump did not agree. "No, me fight next, first," he said defiantly. The announcer took in both orcs that stood before him and smiled. "Well, my good orcs, I have no problem with that, but first let me go over the rules with you. If you agree, then you can fight. If not, well, then you can be on your way." The orcs nodded in unison. Smiling, the announcer explained. "Rule number 1. Do not kill your opponent. We operate within the Prague's laws here. If you kill a man in the octagon, you are arrested and tried for murder. Once your opponent is out cold, taps out, or yields, you stop fighting. You boys understand rule number 1? The orcs nodded in unison. "Rule 2, the announcer said without missing a beat. If the organizers tell you to stop fighting, you stop fighting. Fail to stop fighting, and the archers surrounding the arena will shoot you dead." After stating Rule 2, the announcer motioned towards the many archers that were circling the ring. They were on short towers that gave them the perfect firing position for anyone inside the arena. Both orcs nodded in unison. "Rule number 3. No weapons. You're allowed any armor you wish to bring, but absolutely no weapons. Hands, fists, claws, teeth only," the announcer said. "Makes for a better fight. Fewer deaths and more blood, which gets everyone excited," he said with a laugh. Both orcs nodded their understanding. Nodding approvingly, the announcer began explaining how the octagon worked. "Well, boys, now that you understand the rules, here's how this works. The fights are random. We pit you against whoever happens to be the next in the ring. If you win, you will receive gold. If you lose, the arena cleric will heal you up and send you home to rest and retrain." The announcer puffed out his chest a little as he told him about the cleric. He seemed very proud of the fact that the arena had his very own cleric. The look of pride didn't last long, however. A shadowed look replaced his cheery features, and the voice took on a dire tone. "However, if you are killed in the arena due to your opponent not following Rule 1, we will pay your next of kin handsomely. And I ensure that anyone that fights in my octagon is well taken care of. It's good for business," he said matter-of-factly. Both orcs nodded in unison. "We fight now, Human, or you talk more?" Thump Thump asked. The announcer burst with laughter. Step into the arena, my friend. You're next. Thump Thump eagerly entered the arena. Upon entering, he ran a quick lap around the inside of the octagon to loosen up and get his blood flowing. Flexing his arms, he held both his arms high up in the air. Thump Thump fight! He bellowed to the crowd. The crowd was not impressed. Boos and jeers assaulted Thump Thump from the crowd. This should have upset him, but Thump Thump took their ill words for encouragement and smiled brightly. Behind him, a gate opened, and a screeching metal-on-metal sound caused Thump Thump to turn around. What he saw made his smile even wider. From behind the gate came a huge white lion. The lion's mane was heavily scarred from years of battle, and one of his eyes was missing. The lion took one look at Thump Thump and roared his challenge. The sound was primal, proud, and without a hint of fear. The crowd roared back their approval and began chanting the lion's name. Snaggletooth! 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 Thump Thump did not understand why they called the lion Snaggletooth. The lion's teeth were not only all there, but they gleamed white and looked as sharp as daggers. Stupid humans, Thump Thump said to himself. Raising a hand to calm the crowd, the announcer walked to the center of the octagon. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we have a new contestant in the arena, he bellowed to the crowd. Gesturing towards Thump Thump, he continued. From the savage wastes, we bring you an orc that was mothered by slaughter and fathered by havoc. His black orc has killed hundreds and is on his way to kill hundreds more. He graciously took the time from his slaughtering to grace us with his presence and skill. I give you Thump Thump! The crowd was slightly more receiving of Thump Thump after the announcer's words. Only barely, though, and the jeering and booing continued until the announcer began introducing the line. Our four-legged friend over here needs almost no introduction. You know him, you love him, Snaggletooth! Yet again, as the announcer finished the introduction, the crowd exploded in cheer. Zarktis and Goldtusk watched as thousands of gold were bid on Snaggletooth winning the fight. Shouldering people out of the way, Zarktis walked up to one of the brokers and dropped 25 gold into his hand. On Thump Thump to win, Zarktis grumbled. Goldtusk ripped out one of his solid gold teeth and thrust it into the broker's hand. Same, he said with a snarl. He did not like the fact that these fools believed that the cat could best an orc. A few members of the crowd that saw the bets placed on Thump Thump scoffed, but one look from Zarktis was all it took to make those people swallow their mirth immediately. Thump Thump was growing restless. The fat, loud man was still in the center of the octagon, and instinctively he knew he could not begin fighting until he left. It was very frustrating the way the humans always wanted to talk and wait, even when a good fight was only a few feet away. Exasperated, Thump Thump folded his arms and sat down on the ground. Glaring at the announcer, Thump Thump waited for the man to go away so he could finally fight the big cat. The crowd saw Thump Thump sit down and thought the orc was scared. The bets against Thump Thump tripled immediately. Seeing things getting out of hand, the announcer exited the octagon. Both the lion and Thump Thump, sensing the battle was near, began pacing in their corner of the arena. All betting is closed! Let the battle begin! The announcer yelled. With a howl, Thump Thump threw himself at the lion. The lion, with a bestial roar of its own, did the same. When the two combatants met in the middle of the octagon, first blood went to the lion. Sinking its teeth into Thump Thump's forearm, the animal bit down hard as it could, tearing through flesh and splattering green blood everywhere. With a shout of pain and rage, Thump Thump reared his head back and slammed his forehead into the lion's face. 3 times he bashed his head into the lion's face. On the third hit, the lion finally yielded and released his grip on the orc's arm. Lashing out with its hind legs, the lion kicked and gouged Thump Thump's chest, sending the orc flying backwards and landing hard on his back. The crowd cheered their approval as the fight became much more brutal than they expected. Thump Thump recovered quickly, however, and regained his feet before the lion could shake the dizziness Thump Thump's headbutts had caused him. Seeing the weakness, Thump Thump charged the lion once again and was on the animal before it realized what was happening. Wrapping his powerful arms around the lion's body, Thump Thump summoned all of his strength and lifted the lion completely off the ground. With a roar that would have made even the lion proud, Thump Thump slammed the lion on the ground, cracking numerous of its bones and knocking the animal unconscious. Thump Thump was about to finish the animal off when the gates opened all around the arena and the organizers ran out, yelling for him to stop. Remembering the rules, Thump Thump backed away from the lion reluctantly and threw his arms up in the air. "Thump Thump is the bestest!" Stunned by Thump Thump's unexpected victory, most of the crowd was completely silent, shock taking away their ability to speak as they tried to figure out what had just happened. Those that took a chance and bet on the unknown orc were not afflicted in the same way. "I just won a ton! Thump Thump, you're the bestest! Yeah!" one of the excited winners yelled. A few more voices joined the first, but it was Goldtusk's roaring approval that returned the crowd's voices, and the cheers shook the octagon to its foundation. Thump Thump made his way out of the arena after a victory lap and met the announcer at the exit. "Incredible fight, Thump Thump. Simply incredible. I've never seen anyone beat Snaggletooth so easily before. Perhaps next time you fight, it'll be against my cockatrice. He's been needing a good humbling for years now," the announcer said with a true awe in his voice. Handing Thump Thump a small purse, he respectfully shook the orc's hand. "There's your earnings for winning your fight. I hope to see you in the octagon again soon." There was no sarcasm in his voice. Thump Thump nodded to the pudgy man. "Thanks," he said with a grin and walked over to his allies. As Thump Thump rejoined his group, he saw Zarktus putting a man back on the ground and 2 pouches of gold being placed on his belt. "Next time, you pay me first, peasant," Zarktus spat at the broker. Shoving him away, Zarktus nodded to Thump Thump as he folded his arms over his chest. Goldtusk clapped Thump Thump on the shoulder as he rejoined them. "Good fight. You make clan proud," he said. "Now you watch true orc fight," he finished with a toothy grin. Thump Thump slapped Goldtusk on the back as he went towards the arena's entrance. "Me fight now, Human," Goldtusk announced to the pudgy announcer. Nodding distracted, the announcer motioned for Goldtusk to enter the arena. As Goldtusk went inside, he saw a young man rush over to the announcer and whisper something frantically at him. The announcer's eyes grew wide and he grabbed Goldtusk by the arm. His grip was much stronger than Goldtusk would have expected. "Orc, please wait until the next fight. The one scheduled to fight this round is our most powerful fighter. He has been known to kill his opponents even though it's against the rules. Please wait for the..." The announcer was cut off short as Goldtusk wrapped his hand around the chubby neck and lifted him off the ground. "No more talk. Send out best fighter. Goldtusk smash him," Goldtusk growled at him. Dropping the red-faced man, Goldtusk turned his back on him and walked into the center of the ring. Boss Goldtusk, me fight anyone! Me win! Goldtusk the bestest!" he bellowed at the crowd. The crowd began to cheer when a gong sounded. Everyone in the audience instantly became silent as the sound reverberated over them. Behind the same gate the lion had emerged from, there became a deep growling and a horrible smell began to emanate from behind it. The announcer, clearly scared, made his way to the center of the arena. That's right, everyone. You know what that means. The champion of the arena is back and ready to fight for your enjoyment, the announcer called out with a strained voice. It was clear that his fear and Goldtusk's rough handling had seriously damaged his ability to speak. 16 confirmed arena kills, not 1 conviction. I give you the one, the only, King Troll, he called out to the crowd as best he could. The reaction from the crowd was nothing less than earth-shaking. Every person in the crowd bellowed their approval with a guttural cheer. It was a full 5 minutes of cheering before the announcer was able to continue. "Our challenger is none other than Boss Goldtusk, leader of the very orc we saw best Snaggletooth," the announcer said with a bit of disdain. There were some boos from the crowd, and the announcer took on a reassuring stance. "I know what you're thinking. How can this orc defeat the undefeatable? Well, I say don't judge too quickly. After all, aren't many of you quite a few gold poor now after judging Thump Thump in the same way?" the announcer asked. His words struck some members of the crowd, and the gambling became in earnest. Zartus grabbed the closest broker and put all the money the group had won on Thump Thump's fight to put it on Gold Tusk to win. "And when we win, you pay me first. Understood?" Zartus spat at the broker he had by the collar. The man meekly nodded his assent, and Zartus released him. His disgust was obvious. After a few minutes, the announcer raced out of the arena. "No more bets! Let the battle begin!" he called out once he was safely outside the octagon. The gate immediately came up, and out came the biggest, nastiest troll Gold Tusk had ever seen. His excitement for this fight could not have been any stronger.
Welcome to another edition of Thunderdome!
The monster was preluded by its unbelievable stench. Those with weaker constitutions in the crowd began either throwing up or passing out when the scent hit them. Gold Tusk watched as the enormous troll ducked under the gate as it opened and strolled into the arena. Gold Tusk admitted that he was a large opponent, but he couldn't see what the big deal was. Giants were much larger than this disgusting creature. Not wanting to wait any longer, Gold Tusk pounded on his own chest over and over until the pain and rage mixed inside him. He felt the power of the feeling surge inside him, and he released its power in the way all orcs instinctively understood. The power released from Gold Tusk in that moment caused many of the crowd to be overcome and attack each other in a feral rage. Thump Thump tried to dive into the fray himself, but Zartus caught him and backhanded him across the face until the rage subsided. The arena organizers quelled the fighting amongst the audience just as quickly and brutally. Gold Tusk saw none of this, however. Surging with orky power, he charged across the octagon and used every ounce of his momentum and strength to uppercut the troll right in his face. The blow struck true, and the impact sounded like a dwarven rifle being shot inside a cave. Blood, teeth, and a chunk of the troll's jaw flew into the sky as his head rocked backward. Far from finished, Gold Tusk punched, kicked, bit, clawed, and headbutted the troll with everything he had. Chunks of troll flesh, blood, and bone went everywhere, and the troll could do nothing against Gold Tusk's assault other than endure it. The attack lasted a full 2 minutes, and by the time Gold Tusk broke away from the troll, everyone in the crowd was awestruck at his ferocity. Gold Tusk backed away a few steps from the troll. He was breathing heavily and felt weak as the power of the Wog drained from him. He looked at the damage he had done to the troll and was pleased. The troll was in a very sorry state. Both of the troll's arms were broken and were twisted at angles they were never intended to shape. The troll's left leg had the flesh ripped off to the bone and bled freely. A large puddle of blood formed at its feet. Both of the troll's eyes were destroyed, its lower jaw hung from its head by a scrap of flesh, and its body was a mass of bruises and raw open wounds. Gold Tusk knew it was just a matter of moments before the troll died, and he was announced as the winner. Contemptuously, he walked over to the troll. He intended to push the weak creature over and end its suffering. Before he could react, the troll gripped him with both arms in a grip of solid steel. Gold Tusk watched in horror as most of the wounds he caused the troll regenerated before his very eyes. The troll's face almost immediately healed, as if Gold Tusk had never put a finger on him. Both eyes came back and focused on Gold Tusk. The troll's jaw mended and reattached itself to the rest of his head. Other than a few minor cuts, the troll's face was whole and intact. Next, Gold Tusk watched as the meat on the troll's leg grew back at an incredible rate. Within moments, the leg was whole and strong once again. Only a minor scar was left to show anything had ever happened. The troll's arms healed the breaks, and the muscles were strong enough to allow the troll to catch and completely immobilize Gold Tusk, although he hadn't stopped struggling since the troll had grabbed him. The troll grinned stupidly at Gold Tusk and then began to make a choking sound. Somewhere deep in Gold Tusk's racial memory, he knew that the troll meant to puke on him, and that the troll's vomit was more dangerous than hot flowing lava. Gold Tusk kicked and wiggled, trying to get the troll to release him. Nothing worked, and when the troll opened its mouth to allow the puke to flow forth, Gold Tusk decided on a last desperate act of defiance. Hawking all the phlegm he had inside him, Gold Tusk spit as hard as he could into the troll's open mouth. This troll had been alive for hundreds of years, In those hundreds of years, he had puked on so many of his meals that the number was beyond counting. Never once had a meal ever spit into his mouth with the amount or the ferocity that this particular greenskin meal had just done. The shock and surprise the troll felt at such an attack caused him to gasp. That gasp caused the troll to do something he had never experienced in his entire life. He choked on his own vomit. And it really hurt! As the troll began choking and gasping on his vomit, and Goldtusk's loogie, he threw the orc away from him as he used his hands to claw away at the vomit trying to work its way into his lungs. Pain wasn't unfamiliar to the troll, but to feel it inside of his body instead of on the outside was very unexpected and unenjoyed. Hawking and spitting, the troll cleared his airway, and although his eyes watered madly, the pain began to fade and breathing became easier with each breath. Angry that his meal had injured him so, the troll bellowed his rage at his dinner. Chunks of phlegm and spittle splattered all over Goldtusk as he stood up from where the troll had thrown him. With another roar of his own, Goldtusk charged the troll once again. This time, the troll was focused on Goldtusk. This time, it was the troll that used Goldtusk's momentum to his advantage. Goldtusk was coming on too fast to stop in time to avoid the troll's blow. The punch connected directly with Goldtusk's face and stopped the orc in his tracks. The two combatants pummeled each other to the roaring approval of the crowd. The problem was, the troll was regenerating much of the damage Goldtusk was causing. Goldtusk was not. Beaten and bloody, Goldtusk stumbled back from the troll after yet another powerful punch made contact. His arms felt leaden and his body was numb. His vision was blurring, but he could see that the troll was in far better shape. Even now, the troll's jaw reset itself yet again after their latest skirmish. Frustration fueled his fury, however. There was no quit in Goldtusk. As he prepared to throw himself at the troll once again, the troll surprised him. In a burst of sudden movement, the troll lunged for Goldtusk and drove him to the ground. The troll landed heavily on top of him, and the pain was extreme. Goldtusk felt many of his ribs crack, and he was having trouble feeling his legs. The troll smiled down at him, thick rivulets of drool dripping down onto Goldtusk's face. Furious at having the troll smile at him, Goldtusk bit deep into the troll's throat, tearing out a huge chunk of the troll's flesh. It was to no avail, however. The wound healed itself in a matter of moments. The troll tired of his meal lashing out at him, beat Goldtusk against the ground until he went limp. The troll stood up and looked down at the broken, bleeding meal laying on the ground before him. As he reached down to break off a leg and finally enjoy his meal, he was suddenly surrounded by men wielding burning torches. Fire invoked a primal fear inside the troll, and with a shriek he fled back to the gate he had emerged from, completely forgetting about the meal he had fought so hard to earn. The crowd boomed their approval and cheered King Troll's name. Zarktus and Thump Thump stood silently looking at their fallen ally's broken body. Neither was sure what to expect, so they waited to see what would happen. A hunched man in a white robe came out soon after the troll was gone and laid his hands on Goldtusk. A soft glow surrounded Goldtusk's body, and his wounds began to mend immediately. After a few minutes, the orc began to stir and regain consciousness. He was far from fully healed, however. It was apparent, though, that the cleric had saved his life. Two of the arena organizers helped Goldtusk to his feet and brought him to Zarktus and Thump Thump. Zarktus looked at Goldtusk with contempt. "You owe me 50 gold, was all he said. Thump Thump said nothing as they all left the octagon. Discouraged by Goldtusk's loss, Zarktus makes an appointment with Prog's item identifier for the next morning. Meanwhile, while the paladin and the orcs were busy, Avon was also searching for something inside of Prog. He was searching for a victim. Asking the locals who the worst blacksmith in town was, he got many odd looks and puzzled expressions. However, each person he asked pointed him in the direction of Melissa the dwarf. She owned a small blacksmith at the edge of the merchant section of Prague. The people that directed Avon to her shop told him that she was just terrible. Her horseshoes were always straight and her nails were always bent. The only reason she was still in business was because she was from a very wealthy family. Back during the Cataclysm War, all the races were severely diminished by the fighting. After the war was over, there were many orphans, and so it became somewhat normal for people of one race to adopt an orphan child of another. In this case, a wealthy empire family, the Pendragons, adopted a dozen dwarven orphans. The dwarven children outlived their foster parents, and so inherited their wealth over the years. Now Melissa Pendragon was the proud owner of her very own blacksmith shop. Occasionally, her human brother would stop by her shop and purchase for her any supplies she may need. He would also see to it that her coffers were full. For the most part, it seemed the people of Prague pitied her. She was exactly the kind of person Avon was looking for. Without hesitation, he made his way to Melissa's shop. Avon found the blacksmith without any difficulty. It was the only blacksmith in the entire merchant section that had 0 patrons. Avon cast a quick charm spell on himself and walked into the smithy. "Hello? Is Melissa here?" he asked, his words innocent and silky. A gruff, ugly female dwarf was busy beating on a piece of iron. Her hair was half singed off her head, and she was covered in scars from burns. Avon could only assume the injuries came from their forge. The piece of iron she was beating on was far too cool for whatever work she was trying to accomplish. The wares for sale hanging around the forge were of terrible quality, and that was just being generous. Twisted, crumbling pieces of metal with crude leather bindings wrapped around one end were marked as masterwork swords and daggers. There was a bin full of shrapnel marked nails, and another bin full of bent shrapnel named horseshoes. Avon was thoroughly sickened with this sad excuse for a dwarf immediately. Upon hearing someone call her name, the dwarf put down her hammer and turned to greet Avon. "Hello, dear. How may I help you?" she greeted him warmly. Avon didn't waste any time. "I have traveled far in order to find a blacksmith that would take me on as an apprentice." He finished his request with a bright smile. He was really trying to sell himself to the dwarf. His act won over the dwarf completely. Melissa's eyes began to fill with tears of joy. She wiped them away, but more quickly took their place. Looking away from Avon, she spoke. "You have no idea how long I've waited for someone to ask me that question, young elf." Her shoulders began to tremble as she poured her heart out to Avon. Avon, for his part, stood motionless at the door. This was going better than he had anticipated. "I hear what they say about me in the streets. They call me spoiled, a no-talent hack. One person even said that an ogre would have more talent at a forge than I. Can you believe it?" Melissa asked, her voice cracking. She stood silently for a long moment, her back facing Avon. Getting control of herself, she took a deep breath and turned to face Avon once again. With a smile as bright as the day, she nodded happily. "I will proudly take you on as my apprentice, my friend, and thank you for this. Truly, thank you." Avon didn't miss a beat. "No, ma'am. Thank you for this glorious opportunity," he said, his words as silky as before. Still smiling, Melissa picked up the piece of iron she was abusing when Avon first walked in and thrust it back into the cool coals of her forge. "Well, my dear, we will begin your first lesson immediately," Melissa said cheerfully. A look of confusion flashed across her face. I'm sorry. In all the excitement, I don't believe I got your name," she said, embarrassed. Avon gracefully bowed. "I am Avon Darksun, master. Pleased to make your acquaintance," he said. Melissa blushed at Avon's response. Holding out a hand to shake, she replied, "I am Melissa Pendragon, foster daughter of the Pendragon family," she said proudly. Avon bowed again. "I apologize, milady. I didn't know you were noble-born." Avon had to bite his tongue to stop from smirking. Melissa burst into a tittering laughter. "Oh, stop, Avon. I was adopted after the Cataclysm War by the Pendragon family. They're a fine family and took great care of me and my siblings," Melissa said with a smile. Winking at Avon, she added, "Didn't you wonder why I didn't have an accent?" Feigning embarrassment, Avon stammered, I did not want to be disrespectful, master." Melissa barked laughter at his reply. "Oh, come now, Avon. Feel free to ask me anything you want. What kind of master would I be if I denied to answer your questions?" she answered with a chuckle. Avon stayed bowed. "I shall not hesitate again, master. Thank you for the lesson." Melissa blushed again, and looking off balance, turned back to the piece of iron sitting in the cold coals of her forge. "First you must work the bellows in order to get the iron nice and hot," Melissa told Avon. She motioned for him to work the bellows. Avon did so, and was sadly surprised when Melissa pulled the iron from the just warming coals. "There now. Next you beat the metal into the shape you wish it to become. This takes much strength and skill, so pay close attention, Abon, Melissa said. It was obvious to Abon the dwarf was desperately trying to impress him. He played along. Understood, master. I will observe every detail, he replied with feigned awe. Blushing once again, Melissa set to her task with fervor. She worked the piece of iron for an hour, the entire time giving Abon some of the worst blacksmithing advice he'd ever heard. Abon himself was a knowledgeable and very skilled blacksmith. He was trained by the blacksmiths of Harganeth, the same smiths that forged the infamous executioner blades feared across the realms. Still, Abon had an agenda, so he stoically stood there and allowed Melissa to go through the motions and horrendously make every mistake one could make while blacksmithing. He loathed this woman, and with every terrible bit of advice she uttered, Abon wanted to smash her skull in even more. He stayed his hands, however, knowing that he was in this deception for the long run, and to act now would not benefit him at all. Finally, the hour-long lesson in patience ended when Melissa turned to him with the finished sword. The warped piece of iron was barely long enough to be considered a dagger, and was heavily pitted and scarred from the beating it had endured from Melissa. Abon had to be careful to not cut his hands open on the grip of the weapon. The leather straps Melissa had crudely wrapped around the pommel were bristling with jagged ends and sharp edges. Gracefully, Abon bowed deeply. Thank you, master. I will cherish this always, he said. Melissa smiled brightly at his words. Abon, you are the best thing to ever happen to me. Looking up at her new apprentice with adoration, Melissa had a thought. Abon, would you join me for dinner? I just realized it's very late. Abon looked out the window. It was indeed getting dark outside. It had taken him a while to find a mark as perfect as Melissa, and he quickly saw her invitation as yet another opportunity. I would be honored, master, Abon said with his usual silky tone. Almost giddily, Melissa brought Abon upstairs and into her home. Abon was shocked to see that Melissa's home was as nice as it was. The home was made with ironwood, which was imported from Wood Elf Forest only at great cost to the buyer. The furniture was in good repair and made very well. It was the kind of home one would expect a minor noble to own, not a washed-up dwarven blacksmith. Melissa motioned for him to take a seat in an incredibly comfortable wooden chair near the fireplace. Make yourself comfortable, apprentice, Melissa said with a giggle. If you think my smithing is impressive, wait until you taste my stew, she said proudly. Abon shuddered. However, when he saw Melissa look up at him, he smiled widely and nodded happily. Melissa smiled back and brought Abon a wooden goblet filled with a brownish liquid. Here's some water for now, apprentice. I don't want you to ruin your appetite, she said happily. One look at the liquid inside, and Abon knew he would sooner die than drink it. Luckily for him, Melissa immediately focused her attention on preparing the meal. Abon put the goblet on the side table next to him. He busied himself by watching Melissa cook. Melissa started by creating a fire in the fireplace. Then she hung a very dirty cooking pot over the fire and poured a large quantity of dirty water into the pot. The sickly sweet smell that began to emanate from the pot made Abon lose his appetite instantly. Blissfully unaware, Melissa continued her work. Going into her well-stocked cupboard, she grabbed up handfuls of random fruits and vegetables and brought them over to the pot. Crushing the items in her bare hands, she dropped the pulp masses into the cooking pot. Abon had heard the cooking of goblins was something like this. He began to wonder if they were the ones responsible for teaching this dwarf how to handle herself in a kitchen. Melissa saw Abon watching her and gave him a wink. Don't worry, Abon. Dinner will be ready soon. Abon didn't trust himself to speak, so he simply responded with a graceful nod. This seemed to do the trick because Melissa almost skipped back into the kitchen to retrieve the next ingredient for the stew. Abon watched as Melissa retrieved a hunk of mutton out of another cupboard. Unlike the vegetables and fruit that seemed fresh, the mutton looked old and dry. Tearing 2 large chunks of meat from the bone, Melissa walked back over to the cook pot and tossed the meat in. She then went back over to the leg of mutton and took a large bite out of it. Looking up, she offered Abon a bite as well. As respectfully as he could, Abon shook his head to decline her offer. Melissa rolled her eyes. Oh, I'm sorry, Abon, she said with her mouth full of mutton. I forgot elves don't like meat off the bone, she said condescendingly. Abon forced a smile. How well you know me, master. Melissa smiled and swallowed. Yeah, I'm smarter than most, she stated matter-of-factly. She then made her way back over to the cooking pot and began stirring the contents with her bare arm. Avon noticed with revulsion that the arm she used to stir with came out of the pot looking much cleaner than it did going in. With Melissa distracted with the cooking, Avon decided to make his move. Standing up quietly, he fished out a small vial of agony from his pack. Pouring it into his goblet of water, he walked up behind Melissa as she cooked. "Master?" he asked sweetly. Melissa jumped at his voice. Clearly she hadn't heard him come up from behind her. "Oh my, apprentice!" she said, startled. "You elves are quite on your feet, aren't you?" Avon smiled as sweetly as he could. "I have a gift for you for your kindness." He offered her the goblet. "Elven ale from the shores of Nagaroth," he said proudly. He tried to calm his quickly beating heart. If Melissa saw through his ruse now, everything he had been forced to endure would have been for naught. Melissa looked from Avon to the goblet and back. "Where did you get this, apprentice?" she asked. Avon heard the hesitation in her voice and became concerned. Laying it all on the line, he went for broke. "I brought it with me as a gift from my future master. No elven blacksmith could hope to match the skill of a dwarven smith," he said, his smile never leaving his lips. "I just thank the gods that I found a blacksmith that didn't let the fact I'm an elf deter her from taking me on as an apprentice." He finished his lie by kneeling at Melissa's feet. He held the goblet up to her reverently. Melissa was taken aback by the gesture and immediately embarrassed. "Apprentice, stand up! Stop kneeling! I'm not royalty!" She sounded very off balance again, and Avon had to force himself not to smirk. Melissa took the goblet from Avon and drank deep, draining every last drop. Upon finishing, she handed the goblet back to Avon and burped loudly. Sadly, she looked up at Avon. "Thank you for the drink, apprentice, but I found your dwarven ale, well, I'm sorry to say, incredibly weak." Avon's smile was the first honest smile he had worn all day. "There is no need to apologize, master. I should have realized a dwarven constitution wouldn't be bothered by elven brews." Melissa smiled at this and went back to watching over the stew. Avon returned to his seat and waited for his drug to take hold. He only had to wait a few minutes. Avon watched as Melissa slowly began to have trouble standing up. He watched happily as Melissa began to sway and her legs buckled. "Oh my, Avon," she said shakily. "I was wrong about that ale." With that, Melissa fell to the ground, her eyes spinning in her head as the drug took hold of her completely. After a few moments of incomprehensible speech, Melissa finally passed out. The moment Melissa was out, Avon sprung into action. First thing he did was to put Melissa into her bed. His hope was that she would assume she drank too much and had a hangover. He gave her a full dose of agony in the hopes that she would become addicted to the drug, and the withdrawals she would experience would give him complete control over her. Failing that, his backup plan was to get her to sign a will leaving him everything and then give her an overdose of agony. Avon sinisterly laughed to himself as he made his way back downstairs to the forge. Avon immediately set to work in the forge. If he was going to set himself up properly in the city, he was determined to first and foremost improve the reputation of this forge. If he could use Melissa's money to fund his work, every item he sold would be pure profit. Setting himself to the task, Avon began stoking the coals and working the bellows on his soon-to-be-acquired forge. The next day, Zarktis makes his way to his appointment. He finds himself having to enter the inner circle of Prague, is impressed about how tight security is. Finally entering the castle, he heads to the office of the man he's there to meet. As Zarktis enters the chamber of the man that will identify as Helm, he finds himself in a library filled with books of all shapes and sizes. There is a marble table in the middle of the room with chairs of various sizes surrounding it. Taking a seat in the middle of the table, Zarktis removes the helm he took from Berserk and sets it on the table. After a few minutes, a door opens in the back of the room and a heavily adorned skink priest enters the room. Zarktis sensed no fear from the skink priest as he walked over to the table he sat at. Zarktis could feel a cold power emanating from the wizard, however, and the magical taint he felt made him sick. Any creature that used magic over cold steel was an abomination to him. Summoning his considerable willpower, Zarktis controlled his urge to crush the life out of the skink. The skink priest made his way over to the table gracefully and stopped directly across from him. Nodding slightly, the priest spoke. I am Varsuth, chief wizard advisor to the King of Prague. He paused to let that title sink in. What can I do for you, paladin? Zarktis motioned towards the helm. I was told you could identify this for me, he said. His words were hinting at disgust. If Varsuth noticed Zarktis' disgust, he gave no sign. 125 gold, paladin. Zarktis scowled, but placed 125 gold on the marble table. Varsuth took the payment and placed it in one of his pouches without counting the gold. Varsuth picked up the helmet, which was about as big as he was, and quickly inspected it. With a slight nod, he returned the helmet to the table and spoke. This helmet is known as a dragon helm. It is very effective against damage caused by fire. It will serve you well if you find yourself against a foe that wields such a weapon, Varsuth said. Zarktis was pleased by this news. Thank you, Varsuth, he said. He was about to leave when an overpowering urge to mention his mercenary group came over him. Not one to ignore instinct, Zarktis spoke again. Varsuth, I am part of a mercenary group. If you or the king have any tasks you would pay to see accomplished, we would consider them, Zarktis said. Varsuth gave Zarktis an appraising look before shaking his head and speaking. No, brave paladin. The missions I would have for your group would only end in your needless deaths. Come see me when your group is more seasoned. We shall see then. Zarktis nodded his understanding. He then dug the ring out of his pouch he had received from the Mages Guild as a reward for slaying Battlecat. I also have this ruby ring of ruin I received from the Mages Guild. Would you be interested in buying it? He asked as he tossed the ring to the priest. Varsuth caught the ring in midair and placed it on his finger. I offer 1,200 gold for the ring, Varsuth said. Zarktis shook his head. 1,800. Varsuth removed a large bag from one of the bookshelves in the room and placed it on the table. 1,500 gold. I will pay no more than this, the priest said with a hiss. Zarktis shrugged as he picked up the bag. Deal. Without another word, Zarktis left. Leaving the castle, Zarktis regroups with Goldtusk and Thump Thump. They headed into the middle section of Prague and made their way toward the stables. After some haggling, Zarktis spends most of their gold, but is able to purchase himself a war horse, Abon a light scout's horse, and a nag for Drake. Goldtusk and Thump Thump refuse to ride such weak creatures and head out to Prague's farming area to try to find boars. No self-respecting orc would ever ride anything else. Beyond all odds, the orcs are able to find a goblin pig farm. Without hesitation, both orcs walk into the farm. Gobbles! Where you at? Goldtusk yelled. There was the sound of scuffling coming from the pens. Goldtusk and Thump Thump wasted no time walking into the pigs' area. There, they found the goblins that ran the farm. The goblins were large for their kind and extremely fat. Goldtusk and Thump Thump both recognized that the runts must have been very successful as pig farmers here for them to be so large. Upon seeing the orcs standing before them, both goblins fell to their knees. No kill us! No kill us! They begged. Goldtusk was annoyed. Shut up! Give us best boars have. Need mounts, he demanded. One of the goblins jumped up and ran towards a large pen. He came back quickly with two large but old boars. One of the boars was covered in gray fur. Most of its teeth were missing, and large patches of fur were completely gone. Goldtusk was surprised the creature could still walk, let alone the fact that it was still alive. The other boar was past its prime, but still had some life left in it. One of its eyes were missing, and it was mangy, but it would suffice for the time being. He pointed to the boar with only one eye. Claimed, he stated to Thump Thump. Thump Thump, clearly forgetting why they were here, simply nodded dumbly. When Goldtusk tried to take the boars from the goblin, they both put up a fight. After a quick beating, the boars fell into line. Establish dominance, Goldtusk said to Thump Thump with a grin. Shifting his attention from the boars to the goblins, Goldtusk growled at them. This mine now. You under me. You stay here, work farm. I come for stuff sometime. Understand? He barked at the goblins. Both goblins fell to their knees yet again and voiced their understanding. Without a second thought, Goldtusk and Thump Thump left the pig farm and headed to the stables. Upon reaching the stables, Goldtusk was able to purchase a pen to keep his boars in on the condition that he stayed with the boars in order to keep them under control. Happily, Goldtusk settled down with the boars in the pen for the night. Occasionally he had to belt one upside the head, but for the most part, the nights passed without incident.
Oh.
As the next morning drew into the afternoon, Avon was still hard at work creating good elven armaments. He had finished the drake and about 4 longswords when a knock at the door caught his attention. Going to the door, he found a young human male standing outside his forge with an alchemist kit hugged to his body. The human held out his hand cheerfully. "Hello, Mr. Elf. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Marwyn Falric, an inventor, tinkerer, engineer. I am in need of a forge I can use to repair a few items. I'm willing to pay if you're okay with it," Marwyn said. Aben did not want to cause a scene, so he let the man inside. Closing the door behind him, he turned to face the tinkerer. The man looked around the forge and nodded approvingly. "This is a fine forge, Mr. Elf. Very fine indeed," he said. Aben didn't want to like the man, but couldn't help the fact that there was something about this man that was growing on him. Deciding not to kill him right away, Aben motioned to a corner. "Please feel free to set up in that corner. That should give you enough space for your work," Avon said measuredly. Nodding enthusiastically, Marwyn began unpacking his alchemist kit in the corner Avon had shown him. Avon watched him for a moment. "My name is Avon. Please refrain from calling me Mr. Elf," he said. Marwyn looked up from his work. "Pleased to meet you, Avon. I must say your forge is just perfect." The honesty of the words and the almost childlike innocence he spoke them with made Avon smile. Without replying, Avon returned to his work in the forge, leaving the tinkerer to his own devices. They worked in silence for an hour when Avon noticed what the tinkerer was making. "Is that gunpowder you're making, Marwyn?" he asked curiously. Marwyn seemed to have forgotten Avon was in the forge with him. Looking up at the unexpected question, he seemed to be surprised to see Avon. A few seconds later, he smiled proudly. "I sure am!" "Why?" Avon asked. The question seemed to confuse Marwyn. Well, I'm not really sure. I just felt like making something. I should have about 6 pounds of it soon," he said, confused. Avon couldn't help but to laugh. The man was like a hyper-intelligent child, the perfect patsy for one such as him. "What brings you to Prague, Marwyn?" Avon asked. For the next 2 hours, Marwyn recounted the events that brought him to the doorstep of the forge. Avon listened intently to his story and found he liked this man very much. So much talent and intelligence, with none of the worldly experience or wisdom to temper it, and to keep people from taking advantage of him. Avon couldn't let an individual like this escape him. "Marwyn, my friend, if you have no other plans, my friends and I are part of a mercenary group. It would do us good if you would join us," Avon said. Marwyn barely thought about it before nodding. "Sounds good. I've got nowhere else to be." As Avon and Marwyn are working out the details to their new partnership, another more powerful knock comes from the door. Avon already knew who it was before he opened the door. He is not surprised to find Zarktus and Thump Thump waiting outside. As they walk in, Avon introduces them to Marwyn. They accept him, and Zarktus adds his name to their roster. Avon notices that one of the orcs is missing at this point. "Where's Goldtusk?" he asks Zarktus. "In the stables, watching over the boars," he said. Avon could tell Zarktus couldn't have cared less. Taking Zarktus to the side where no one could overhear them, Avon brings Zarktus up to speed with what was happening and what his plans were. Zarktus reciprocates and brings Avon up to speed with what they have been up to. It was after they were done exchanging information that they heard moaning coming from above them. With a sigh, Avon shook his head. "And that would be Melissa." As Avon went up the stairs to enter the home, the party followed. Avon didn't care. They were all going to find out eventually. What they found upon entering Melissa's home surprised all of them, however. The dwarf was in the middle of the living area and was in very bad shape. Melissa had drug herself into the living area and was now alternating between puking and pooping into an already overflowing chamber pot. A puddle was forming under her, and the smell was horrendous. Melissa had stripped off her clothes and was sweating profusely. She was crying hysterically, and as she heaved in spasm, more fluids came out of her than Avon would have thought possible. He couldn't have been prouder of the effect his drug was having on the dwarf. Marwyn was not of the same opinion. One look at the scene playing out before him sent his own stomach reeling. One whiff of the smell emanating from the room was enough to push him over the top, and he added the contents of his own stomach to the room as he fled the scene and returned to the forge. Thump Thump couldn't be less interested in the dwarf. One whiff of the smell coming from the cooking pot garnered his full attention, and he took the entire pot off the hook. He drank deeply of the day-old contents. A huge grin spread across his face as he swallowed the meal. Mmm, was all he said. Avon shook his head and made his way carefully towards Melissa. Melissa saw Avon coming and choked back her tears just enough to be able to talk. "Oh, Avon, please, please help me," she begged as another wave of nausea overwhelmed her. Avon waited for her to finish before speaking. "Melissa, I can help you, but you must trust me," he said, his words as silky as they were sinister. Melissa didn't hear the tone, only the hope they offered. "Anything. Just please. Help!" she begged. Avon pulled out another vial of agony. "Drink this. It will help," he said softly. Melissa snatched a vial from Avon's hand and downed the contents in a single gulp. Almost immediately the nausea left her, and she dragged herself out of the puddle of refuse she was in. "Thank you, Avon. Thank you," she said. Tears began flowing down her face as the relief hit her. "You are welcome, Master. Please rest now. I will take care of you," Avon said. Not even a hint of true concern was in his words. Falling back in unconsciousness, Avon picked Melissa up and took her to the bath to clean her up. Looking over his shoulder, he called back to Zarktis. "Have one of them clean up the room, would you?" he said. Zarktis looked at Thump Thump, who was merrily finishing the stew. "Hey, Orc! Clean up this mess and we'll get you more stew," Zarktis ordered. Thump Thump took one last gulp from the pot and let it fall from his hands. "For more dirty stock stew, Thump Thump clean," he said enthusiastically. As Avon washed the filth off Melissa, she came to. "Oh, hi, Avon," she giggled. Avon said nothing. He could tell from the look in her eyes she was hallucinating. This was a common effect of his drug. Melissa kept on talking. "Oh, hello to you, Mrs. Unicorn. How did you get in my house?" she asked drunkenly. Avon smirked. No, Mrs. Unicorn. You stay away from my vault. It's not for you," Melissa said while looking towards her pantry. This caught Avon's attention. "Melissa, what vault?" he asked gently. It took Melissa's eyes a moment to focus on Avon once again. Once they did, however, she seemed very happy. "Avon, have you met the unicorn? She's very noisy," she said happily. Avon forced an irritated smile. "Yes, I have, Melissa. What were you talking about?" he asked. Melissa scrunched her bulbous nose and furrowed her brow. "The vault isn't for you, Avon. It's mine. I keep all my money in it, and it's locked with my key," she said angrily. Avon tried again. "Where's the vault, Melissa? So I know where not to go. That way I don't invade your privacy," he said sweetly. Melissa shook her head. "I can't tell you, Avon. It's a secret," she said with a pout. "Besides, if I told you my vault was in the floor of my pantry, my brother would become furious with me," she said in a whisper. Avon could not stop the smile on his face from growing wide. From behind him, Zarktis whispered, "Where does she keep the key?" Avon turned and grinned evilly at his ally. "Melissa, where do you keep the key to your vault? I want to make sure no one steals it," he said softly. Barely aware of her surroundings, Melissa laughed. "Don't worry, Unicorn Elf. The key is safe, in my nightstand. No one will find the secret part in the drawer. The knot. Very secret. Unicorn. Elf. Was all Avon was able to get out of her before his drug knocked her unconscious again. Zarktus was already making his way to Melissa's bedroom as Avon began drying the dwarf off. Avon carried Melissa's unconscious form into her bedroom. He was unsurprised to see Zarktus hunched over the nightstand, probing it for the secret compartment. While Zarktus was busy doing that, Avon finished dressing Melissa and tucked her into bed. He then joined Zarktus in trying to find the key. Together they figured out that there was a false knot in the wooden nightstand that acted as a latch. Once pressed, a compartment inside the nightstand opened and a single key fell out. The two left the room with the key and moved towards the pantry. Shifting all the dry goods off the floor, the two easily found that the floorboards were loose. Once they removed the boards, they discovered a solid metal door with a single keyhole. Inserting the key they found in Melissa's nightstand, the door opened with a click. As they opened the door, they both gasped. Thousands of gold pieces were inside the vault, more than they could possibly count in a day. Laughing, the two men closed the vault and locked it. Thump Thump, who was just finishing up cleaning up Melissa's mess, looked at his allies. You find more stew?
You're gonna tell me what I want to know, or I'm gonna beat you to death in your own house.
Sitting down at the table, Avon began drafting up a last will and testament for Melissa. Now that he had access to her money, her forge, and her home, she was quickly losing value to him. It didn't take Avon long to draw up a will that left all of Melissa's worldly goods to him in the event of her death. Confident it would hold up, he went back into Melissa's room and shook her awake. Melissa awoke, but she was barely coherent. It took many attempts, but finally Avon was able to get Melissa to sign the will. Tucking the parchment safely away in his vest, Avon let the dwarf sleep. Finding Zarktus, Avon nodded towards the pantry. We need to move this gold, just in case my plan falls through. Zarktus simply nodded. Walking down into the forge, the two allies discussed what to do. In the end, they decided to use the burlap sacks they found in the forge to move the gold to the Prague bank and create an account in their names. Then, if they were found out, they could escape the city and retrieve their money at a later time. Confident with the plan, they let Marwyn in on it. Seeing that he was either with them or dead, he agreed to take part in their scheme. The trio spent the rest of the day and a portion of the night filling burlap sacks full of gold. Meanwhile, Thump Thump spent his time devouring every ounce of meat Melissa had in her home. The orc was happily snoring before the sun set on this most profitable of days.
Shiny. Let's be bad guys.
The next morning, Avon, Zarktus, Marwyn, and Thump Thump loaded up a wheelbarrow they found in the forge and headed into the intersection of Prague where the bank was located. The wheelbarrow could only hold about 4 bags of gold due to the weight, so, in order to carry more, they enlisted Thump Thump to carry a bag as they made their way to the bank. They left Marwyn behind to continue filling bags full of gold while the rest of them ran their errand. The first trip to the bank went off without a hitch. The banker they dealt with was skeptical at first, but once he saw how much gold the party was depositing, he quickly changed his tune. Avon sent the account up in his name and Zarktus's. After that, they shook hands and headed back for a second load of gold. Everything was going perfectly. The second trip they made also went off without a problem. On the third trip, however, someone finally took notice. As the allies were leaving the bank on their third trip, they were approached by a unit of city guards. 5 dwarven ironbreakers and a man-eater surrounded the allies. A grizzled dwarf walked up to Zarktus. Oi! You lot have been busy today, haven't you? The gruff dwarf asked. Zarktus grunted at him. Move, you're in my way. His tone was threatening. Thump Thump watched with interest. It was unclear if he realized he was in danger as well. Avon took stock of the guards. All of them were heavily armored and armed. If a fight broke out here, there was a very slim chance that any of them would survive. Before that could happen, Avon stepped between Zarktus and the guard. Sir Dwarf, is there something we might be able to help you with? He asked. Feigning concern was not difficult for him in this situation. The dwarven guard didn't stop scowling at Zarktus as he answered. Me and my lads noticed you and your lot have been moving a lot of something to the bank. We were just curious on where individuals such as yourselves came upon such wealth. The threat in the guard's tone was obvious. Avon decided to tell a half-truth. I am Melissa the blacksmith's newest apprentice. he began. At the sound of Melissa's name, the dwarves all smirk. The man-eater spit loudly in disgust. Dwarf is no blacksmith. Dwarf is barely dwarf, the man-eater stated. He seemed to be daring the party to argue with him. None of them did. Avon continued. We are moving her gold from her home to the bank so that it will be safe, he explained. The guard seemed skeptical. If that be true, where is Melissa the blacksmith? He asked. Avon didn't miss a beat. She is ill and in bed. That is why we are doing the work and she is resting, Avon replied. He allowed a hint of irritation to seep into his words. He didn't want the guards to think he was too nervous. Nodding, the guard motioned for his fellows to form up around the allies. Not saying we don't believe you, lad, but we best be taking a look on Melissa's well-being ourselves. Lead on, the dwarf stated. Seeing no way to argue his way out of this, Avon consented to the escort. The journey was a short one, but it felt like it took an eternity. The guards flanking the allies were watching them all very closely. There was no fear in any of their eyes, only an eagerness. Zarktis couldn't be sure, but he thought he saw something else in their eyes as well. Could it be greed? He wasn't sure. Upon arriving at the forge, one of the dwarves stood outside the entrance as the rest of them entered. After a quick search, the guard that had first approached them motioned for the stairs that led to the home. Lad, let's go pay Melissa a visit now, he said. Avon nodded and began to ascend the stairs. The rest of the guards and the man-eater stood at the bottom of the stairs, drew their weapons, and refused to let anyone else follow. Zarktis bristled at this, but decided to nurse his rage until the time it best served him. Thump Thump, not understanding at all, played with the bellows of the forge. He enjoyed watching the coals turn red. Upon entering the home, the first thing Avon and the dwarven guards saw was Marwyn busily taking gold from the vault and placing it in burlap sacks. He had numerous bags already filled near the door. Hi, Avon! Who's your friend? He asked when he saw the two enter. Avon did not answer as he led the dwarf toward Melissa's bedroom. The dwarf looked surprised to see Melissa in her own bed, clean, dressed, and alive. He tried to wake her, but nothing he did would rouse her. Giving up on trying to wake her, the guard walked over to Avon, who was watching him from the doorway. The dwarf looked up at Avon and took a relaxed stance. Avon wasn't fooled for a moment. He saw the dwarf cock back the hammer on the pistol behind his back as he went into Melissa's room. Lad, I must admit I expected to find Melissa dead when I came in here. The gods know the useless bitch deserves nothing less after how she dishonors them with her forge, he began. Avon said nothing, but mentally prepared a spell to turn the dwarf if this interaction ended the way he thought it would. However, I don't believe for a moment she would want her gold moved to the Prague bank. She and the bank owner have had dealings in the past that ended with broken bones. As he said this, he grinned at Avon. So that means I have a problem on my hands.
Oh.
As the dwarf finished, he opened his right hand, palm up. I hate having problems in my hands, he said, the hint of a threat getting stronger as he continued his speech. However, you can help me here, lad. If you were to put something of greater value in the other hand, that would help me ignore the problem. That would be beneficial to us both. You following me, lad? The dwarf asked. Avon relaxed once he realized what the dwarf was asking. This kind of bartering was something he was very accustomed to. I understand your dilemma, Sir Dwarf. Would 500 gold to you and each of your men be enough to ease your troubles? Avon asked, slipping easily into the negotiation. The dwarven guard smiled widely at Avon's response. I'm glad we speak the same language, son. I believe 500 gold each would be more than enough to ease our troubled minds. Avon and the dwarf shook hands, and Avon helped the dwarf bring 5 burlap bags full of gold downstairs into the forge. Avon noticed as the gold was divided amongst the dwarves and the man-eater that the ogre kept looking longingly at the drake he had crafted the night before. Avon walked over to the drake and gave it to the ogre. In his hands it was more of a bastard sword, but the man-eater was incredibly pleased with the gift. In return, the ogre convinced the dwarves to help the allies bring the gold to the bank so that no one else bothered them. By the end of the day, largely thanks to the guard's escort and a rented wagon, the full content of Melissa's vault was deposited into the Prague bank. Zarktis and Avon looked at their ledger after the final coin was deposited. Avon whistled. 212,000 gold, he said in a whisper. Zarktis grunted. We have the money. Now we just need the glory. Corn cares not for gold, he said. Avon shrugged. Then tomorrow, go get us another job at the guild. The next morning, Zarktis left alone to find another job at the mercenary guild. When he arrived, there were a few others inside, but for the most part it was just the guild clerks. Seeing the clerk that had rewarded him with the magical ring after his last mission, Zarktis walked over to the man. I need work, he spat at him. He had been idle for too long, and the blood boiling inside of him would require a release soon. The clerk looked up uninterested. With a sigh, he began looking through some paperwork. After a few minutes, he handed Zarktis a contract. Got an elven lord that's looking for an experienced mercenary group to get himself and his son to the Archway Forest 5 days from here, the clerk said as Zarktis looked over the contract. Pay is 50 gold each as a down payment, with 1,000 gold paid upon successful completion. A bonus 1,500 gold will be paid if you're kept on as his bodyguards once you arrive at your destination. Not a bad contract as far as these things go, the clerk added. Zarktis finished going over the contract in silence. It was all there, as the clerk said. We'll do it, he said. The contract said the Elf Lord was to be met at King's Repose in 24 hours. The clerk called out to Zarktis as he was leaving. One more thing, Paladin, he said as the urgency in his voice gave Zarktis pause. There are reports that someone has hired mercenaries to stop the Elf Lord and his son from getting to the Archway Forest. Be prepared for a fight when you go, he warned. Zarktis grinned. I'm always ready for a fight, fool, he replied. With that, he left the guild hall. Well, that's going to do it for Session 2, everybody. It's a bit of a cliffhanger, I know, but I'm a jerk like that. What can I tell you? I hope you guys all enjoyed this second installment of our D&D/Warhammer narrative report. If you guys would like to submit a character name, scenario, challenge, fan art, pictures, anything at all, you want your character added into this storyline somewhere down the road, people have already done it in Session 1 in the comments section. I will definitely be having some of them in Session 3, which will be coming up soon, possibly Session 4. But yeah, anything at all, feel free to put it in the comment section below, and I will, if I like the idea or if I can use it, I will put it in there, and we will see how the party does. Who knows? You could be responsible for a total party wipe, or you could be the newest NPC ally. You never know what we're going to do or how these guys are going to react to NPC, because, well, as you've just seen now in Session 2, they can do some pretty left field stuff. But, yeah, guys, I'm really glad that you guys are still watching this. I hope you guys are still enjoying it as much as I am. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, feel free to put them in the comment section below. But I'm done, so thanks!